Hello, and welcome back to Movie Husbands. Today we are reviewing The Father. The Father was directed by Florian Zeller and stars Anthony Hopkins and Olivia Colman. The film follows Anthony, who is experiencing dementia, and his relationship with his daughter Anne as she cares for his illness. So, Geoff, what did you think of The Father?
I think that I'm going to end up working out how I feel about this movie through our review, maybe, because I'm kind of confused about it. I feel it in a lot of different directions. I think the main thing is, and for the benefit of the audience, for anyone who hasn't seen it, the film is kind of structured in this way that you kind of walk a mile in a person with dementia's shoes. You know, a scene will play out and then he'll go in another room and it's years later or months later, and people kind of come in and out of rooms, and all of these timelines are kind of converging at once, and it's supposed to show you his confusion. I think that really works in an intelligent way. I mean, this film is very intelligently designed, and it's rigorously structured in a way that's very interesting, in a way that's, I think, really impressionistic for how people with dementia actually experience their lives. So I really commend it for that. At the same time, I think the structure at times undermined the emotional beats for me. I think I probably could have felt this film a bit deeper if it wasn't structured this way, or maybe if it was structured the same way but wasn't so caught up in the details. The details are really interesting to follow. There's kind of this thing about his watch. People kind of turn into other people. Olivia Colman's husband is suddenly, you know, a character that's later in the film. So all that is really interesting and smart. I don't know if it helped me feel attached to these characters. I think there may be a little bit of a character deficiency here.
I totally see what you're saying here, and I think this movie tends to forgo some of those emotional things in lieu of the style. I don't know, there's these moments where you kind of feel like you could be in a horror film or a thriller.
Or like a Christopher Nolan movie?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that leads to one of the best aspects about this movie is I think the cinematography. There's these moments, they tend to use a lot of wide angles in this film, and it just leaves you with these moments feeling so small, or like this whole situation is, you know, weighing so much that you just kind of feel like you're sinking into it. And I just felt that with like all those wide angle shots. But then you have these other shots that are very intimate and personal. You know, the background is kind of blurring out and it's a focus, you know, right in the character. And that's why I think they kind of redeemed those emotional beats there.
Yeah, and I should say, I always start with the negative with movies, especially when I'm trying to work through something. I'm still trying to work through how I feel about this movie, but this movie is clearly good and very competently made and intelligently made. So I don't want anyone to think that I disliked it. I'm working through how much I liked it.
Yeah, and I gotta say I really like this film. All these little details that you kind of have to pick throughout the movie, and how all these like you were saying, like faces are changing, objects are ending up in different places, the rooms themselves are changing and evolving, and in terms of the set design, like there's furniture in the room that moves and changes, and
paintings,
it's like and it's just built around this whole timeline that takes place over months, and just it seems like a day, you know, I think, to Anthony.
Yeah, I agree with something you said, that the emotional beats started hitting for me more towards the end of the film, actually in the final 10 minutes or so, but there are some other ones that maybe didn't land quite as much towards the middle. I also think there's an issue with levity in this film. This film is massively depressing. And I had this teacher in high school who'd always say that you need a Porter scene in every tragedy, which is this kind of famous scene from Macbeth that's actually pretty funny and kind of alleviates some of the tension. And I'm not saying that there should be a part of this movie that's funny, but they could have focused a little bit more on the love the characters have for one another, or something to alleviate like how, you know, just frustratingly depressing this movie is. And at the same time, I understand there's really not a lot to be inspired about when you're talking about dementia. You know, it's the same thing with that film Amour, which is, you know, so unbelievably depressing. But I did feel pummeled at times, and I did have that feeling towards the end of the film of why.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that comes down to is the actors here. And starting with Anthony Hopkins, you know, he is just fantastic in this movie. It's interesting, the trajectory of his character in this movie, you tend to grow more of a heart for him. The movie kind of plays him as if he's kind of like a burden.
Yeah.
And how he's kind of mean to people. It's like focused on a lot of these things. And then as the movie progresses, you just see how heartbreaking this is for him.
Yeah.
You know, regardless of how it's affecting everybody else. And it's a very interesting story that I don't think I've seen before. So I really appreciated that, and he's just fantastic in this movie.
Yeah, and he gets he has the ability to be kind of menacing in the beginning of the film. Menacing is maybe too strong a word, but definitely uncaring or mean-seeming. There's scenes where he really gets to show how charming he can be, and there's scenes towards the end where he's extremely vulnerable. And he nails all of those. I mean, Anthony Hopkins is a wonderful actor, but at the same time, he hasn't acted at this level in some time. So it's nice to see that he still has it in him. And Olivia Colman. Yeah, I can't say anything bad about Olivia Colman. Whoa.
She's just amazing as always. There's these little like micro expressions, like the changes in her expressions that she goes through in this movie. And I know you were talking earlier about kind of how the emotional beats didn't really resonate with you at certain times. But if you just look at Olivia Colman's face,
hers did.
Yeah, she'll have an expression, and there'll be this little tiny tweak to it in the way her lips move, or the way her eyes close in on something. And those moments are just fantastic, and you really kind of felt them.
Yeah, that's another thing. I mentioned it briefly at the beginning, but I do think this film sacrifices some of its character for its style, which I guess is okay. Or not even its style, but its structure. Its structure is very admirable because it wants you to, identify with what a person with dementia is actually seeing in their everyday life. So I think that's very commendable. At the same time, we really don't know much about these characters except for his illness. So that could arguably be a flaw, or it's something that I had trouble connecting with about the film.
Yeah, I think the film just wasn't really interested in that too much. I think there's these little aspects where his other daughter, which unfortunately had passed away, and he kind of keeps remembering him, but he still thinks she's alive.
Yeah.
You find out these little things that kind of show up throughout the movie, and then you find out towards the end a little bit like his connection to his mom. And so there's these little things, and I think the movie's just interested in what's happening in this particular moment.
Yeah, this film does kind of treat those like puzzle pieces, and you start to make sense of this. You start to kind of build this man's life as the film builds. There are a lot of things that are mentioned that aren't really explained for a while, and then he has sort of a flashback, or kind of we mentioned before how he walks into a different room and it's a scene from his past. You start to learn all of these things and how they make sense. And again, I think that's commendable, but at the same time, I don't know.
I feel like this movie as a whole is from his perspective. The only things the movie is going to offer us is what's coming from his perspective. And he just can't remember, and he's jumbling all these things up. And so that's what I find so heartbreaking about the movie and emotionally resonant about it.
Yeah, I completely get that. And I think that I completely understand why that works completely for somebody. I think to me, just what you sacrifice in order to do that leaves me a little cold.
I can understand that. I think one of the major things I loved about this movie is how all these things tie together in terms of the acting, the writing, the cinematography in particular. I felt like it was very cohesive, like it was all meant to be together. I loved how the cinematography informed, where the characters were or how are they feeling, how small they might feel in a scene, or how vulnerable they might be.
Yeah, it's brilliantly scripted, and I think this is the only Best Picture nominee that we hadn't seen when the Oscar nominations came out. And I had kind of like a head-scratching moment when it got a production design nomination, because I said, isn't that a movie just about a guy with dementia and they're like in the apartment the whole time? But it completely makes sense now because the production design is so tied to the story in such a meaningful and thematic way.
All right, so you want to go for grades?
Yeah, so I'm going to give it a B+. I think, like I said, I hesitate to even say anything negative about it. There are some things that just didn't jive with me personally, but objectively, there's nothing bad to say.
I'm going to go with an A-. That's where I was kind of sitting from the very beginning when the movie ended. I think it all just came together so well, and it all kind of just made sense. It was harmonious.
And that's a review of The Father, which is now streaming on VOD. What did you think of The Father? Let us know in the comments, and we'll see you in the next one.